Rabbi Akiva was a fascinating person to everyone of that generation, or at least many people. They may have not always agreed with him, but he was still fascinating. And we have at least 10 or 15 stories about Rabbi Akiva. One of them, of course, is a favorite, where he once went to an astrologer, and the astrologer had told him that his daughter would die on her wedding day. And you can imagine that that would be a big concern to him. But he didn't tell her anything. He just waited to see what would happen. And at the end of the wedding, when he saw that she had actually lived, he said to her, "Did you do something special today?" And she said, "Yes. When a guest came in the middle of the wedding, and he was a poor man, I gave him my own dish, my own plate." So it was her wedding day, but she went out of her way to do kindness. And what they noticed was the pin. She had stuck the pin of her veil in a wall. And they took the pin out, and there was a snake at the end of it, which could have killed her. And so what Rabbi Akiva was saying was the astrologer had a point. He knew something, but it wasn't necessarily the deciding factor. And there's a pasuk that says, Tzedakah tatzil mimavet, that tzedakah, kindness, saves from disaster or death. And so Rabbi Akiva's daughter was able to live. We also know that Rabbi Akiva's story of meeting his wife, Rachel, is probably the only love story that I know of in the entire Talmud. And as the story goes, Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd, and he was an ignorant man. He didn't know any Torah. And in those days especially, someone who was ignorant of Torah was not respected, and he wasn't respected. And as a matter of fact, his father-in-law, Nakdimon Ben Gurion, I believe, was horrified when he found out that his daughter fell in love with a shepherd who knew nothing. And of course it's sad, because this simple shepherd had so much inside of him. And the story goes that his father-in-law was so upset that he said, "I will not give you a penny of my inheritance. You're not getting anything from me." And what happened was, as the story goes, Rabbi Akiva, years went on, and his father-in-law apparently didn't see him and didn't recognize him, and Rabbi Akiva went out to learn Torah. And he became very wise. And he comes back into town with throngs of students walking behind him. And his father-in-law walks over to him, not realizing that it's him, and says, "Rabbi, I have a question. I have a problem. I made a promise that I will not give my son-in-law, Akiva, anything from my vast estate, but it turns out that he actually, and I made that promise because I knew that he was an ignoramus. I don't want any of my money going to an ignoramus. But it turns out that I heard that he went to study Torah, and he knows a thing or two now." And Rabbi Akiva, recognizing that it's his father-in-law, says to his father-in-law, because his father-in-law had this problem, he had made this promise. And of course, it's hard to know whether Rabbi Akiva is actually legitimate in this instance to annul his own father-in-law's promise, but it's a story. And what he says to his father-in-law, looking at him, he says, "If you would have known that this son-in-law of yours would eventually know Torah, would you have made the promise?" And he says, "No." He says, "Not only that, if my son-in-law would have known anything, even like one letter or one word, I wouldn't have made the promise." And so Rabbi Akiva says, well, in that case, your promise is annulled. And what I love about that story is that sometimes we make a promise to ourselves that we will never be this or will never be that. And the question is, what else do we really have inside us? Because his father-in-law did not see the greatness in this simple, ignorant shepherd. And who knows who we meet during the day, and we look at them and they might just be a simple person, but maybe there's something really great in them. There are many other stories about Rabbi Akiva, and one of them, of course, is when he was really poor, he was sitting in this barn. His father-in-law had let him have a little barn at the edge of the yard, and that's where he and Rachel would sleep. And one day, Elijah the prophet, that's the story, I don't know if it's true, but Elijah the prophet comes to the barn and says, I'm looking for straw. I don't have any straw. Could you lend me some straw, or could you give me some straw? And Rabbi Akiva turns to his wife and says, look, do you see? We have straw, and there are people out there who don't even have straw. And his wife looks at him and says, you should go study Torah. And I always wondered, what's the relationship between those two lines, that Rabbi Akiva noticing that he has straw, and his wife turning to him and saying, you should go study Torah. Now, there may be no relationship, but what I notice is that Rabbi Akiva had gratitude. He noticed what he does have. And his wife saw that he noticed his possessions. He was thankful for what he does have. And so she said, well, if you're thankful, if you have a heart that has gratitude, and you're thankful for what you have, you're ready to study Torah, because that's a good prerequisite to be able to have higher wisdom or deeper wisdom.